Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and please welcome Tesla to the channel with this, the 2024 Model 3. Now, you can't deny the fact that when it comes to electric vehicles, Tesla are pretty much at the top of the tree. Now, back when they launched the Model S and Model X, and you couple that with Dieselgate, pretty much kick-started the EV revolution and caused all manufacturers to really think about saving the planet by lowering their CO2 emissions and creating their own ground-up electric vehicles. Now, granted, it didn't all start with Tesla. I mean, we had EVs in the UK with the likes of the Renault Zoe and the Nissan Leaf, both of them hugely popular. But with the Model S and Model X, what we had here were cars that were very innovative, drove brilliantly, were safe, very practical, and had great range. But you couldn't really call them cheap, and that was for a reason. You see, the profits from those cars went into the research and development of this, the Model 3, arguably the brand's most important car. And with all of that technology and know-how, they could create a car that had great range, drove brilliantly, was practical and jam-packed full of kit, but more importantly, was affordable. Now, when this was launched back in 2017, it didn't really have any rivals. So, roll on 7 years and the car has now had its mid-life facelift, and the rivals are coming thick and fast from the likes of Polestar, BYD, Volkswagen, BMW and Hyundai. So, I've had the new facelifted Model 3 for a week, and I'm going to answer a couple of big questions. Number one, what's it like? And number two, with a segment now that has some very good competition against the Model 3, is it still top of the tree, or should you consider something else? Stick with me to find out. Now, when it comes to the Model 3 styling, I will be honest, I wasn't a fan of the pre-facelifted version. It just looked a little bit bulbous and ungainly, and having the Model Y sit next to it didn't help, because they kind of looked like, I don't know, jelly molds or cake tins. You just couldn't see any emotion in the design, even though it was a ground-up EV and looked very aerodynamic and efficient. But I do think they've done a brilliant job with this facelifted version. I love the new slim headlight and tail light design. They look very stylish and distinctive. We've also got a cleaner look at the front as well. You'll notice we don't have fog lights at the front of the new Model 3. That's a little bit disappointing. But I do like the 18-inch alloy wheel design, very aerodynamic in its look. And you can go for optional 19s, but I would stick with the 18s because, well, I'll explain later on in the review. There are a couple of new colours to choose from with the new Model 3, but the big thing about it is that it's meant to be more efficient, more streamlined and more slippery as it goes through the air. But you let me know what you think of the new Model 3's design in the comments section below. Do you like the look of it, or do you think there's a better looking car in the segment? But on that note, I think it's time we stop looking at the outside of the Model 3. Granted, yes, the body shape hasn't changed, so it still has that slight cake tin look to it. But anyway, I think we should have a little look at the inside and see what Tesla have done in there. Sat in the front of the new Model 3, you are greeted by a very minimalistically designed interior that does look quite elegant in its design, if not exactly beaming with character. However, it is a big improvement in some areas over the pre-facelifted version, and it is kind of weird to come across an interior where you could say that there's not much to talk about, but also a lot to talk about at the same time. Now, when it comes to getting in and out of the Model 3, I will say, because it is a low saloon car, you do have to bend down a little bit to get into the driver's seat. Now, if you do suffer from any kind of mobility issues, I will mention the fact that there are no grab handles throughout the entire car. So it can be a little bit difficult if you need to kind of get yourself into the Model 3. So I would recommend looking at something like the Model Y, with the new Model Y coming out in 2025. Now, when you sat in the seats, you do find that they are pretty comfortable, but I would like a bit more support on the sides just to kind of hold me in place, because I have found going around a couple of corners that I do slide around a bit in the seat. Now, there is plenty of adjustment in the seat, and you do have physical buttons in order to do it, as well as adjustable lumbar support. Even the front passenger seat has electrical adjustment, but it does not have the lumbar support with it. And then when it comes to the steering wheel adjustment, it is done via the infotainment system. So it is definitely a case of setup before you set off. But what you'll find is that you can kind of save the settings and everything in the position on your phone, because you can have the Tesla app, which also acts as a key for the car. So your profile will be saved on there. And then when it comes to interior quality, I will say it's actually pretty good, and it's very difficult to find any hard scratchy plastics in here. We've got soft touch plastics here, or leatherette on top of the dash. We have got this fabric coat in here because there is a sound bar implanted in the dash for the stereo. It is a very good system as well. We've got soft touch plastic here on top of the doors. We've got leatherette here on the door panel, on the door handle as well, and on the center armrest. And then the cubby covers here are actually aluminium, so it does give a nice premium feel to it, with some Alcantara for the wireless charging pads. So yeah, when you sit in the Model 3, it is a very different place to sit compared to pretty much every other car. Like I said, it's kind of weird to get in a car where, well, there's not much going on, but at the same time, there's an awful lot going on. So yeah, it is quite unique, and it will take a little bit of getting used to if you've never driven a Tesla before. Cubby spaces are actually pretty good in here. We got some decent sized door pockets with a nice cutout for a medium sized bottle of drink in there. However, they do get quite shallow further back, so some rivals have got larger door pockets, but they are lined with fabric, so loose items shouldn't make much noise. However, on the center console is where it really is a highlight for storage. At the front, we got your 2 wireless charging pads lined with Alcantara for a nice premium feel. I will mention that there's no cooling for the wireless charging, so just be aware that your phone could get a bit hot if it is sat there for a long period. And then underneath the first little lid here unveils a nice decent space here that is lined with fabric. We've got like a little kind of ledge here up front, so you could perhaps put a wallet or somebody else's phone in there, so it will sit there nice and easy. And we have got a 12-volt socket, so that's a really decent amount of space. Just behind there we have got another lid which unveils your 2 cup holders. They are rubber lined, and they've got these pretty firm rubber grippers in them. So if you do put a can of drink or perhaps a coffee cup in there, you will find when you pull the coffee cup out, you do get little indentations in there, which is, yeah, quite unique. So just be aware that if you do put any drinks in there, they're not going anywhere. So that's actually really cool. And then we've got your centre armrest, which firstly, I do like the height of it. I can nicely rest my arm on there for a long journey. And when I lift it up, it does unveil more space. Again, it is lined with felt. And yeah, that's just very handy. And then we got the glove box, which basically there are 2 ways to open it. So one of them is pressing the microphone and asking the car to open. The other is with a couple of buttons, and it does pop open. And again, it is lined with fabric, which I really do like, but it is very narrow and it is quite awkward to reach over and try and grab anything from there, which is a little bit disappointing. There are rivals out there that do have larger glove boxes, and also makes a bit of a slam when you close it. So yeah, when it comes to cubby spaces, this center console is a real highlight here in the Model 3, and I do like the fact that the door pockets are lined with fabric, and they got that nice recess there for a medium-sized bottle. Now, when I usually review an electric vehicle, I kind of go around the fact that, you know, the manufacturer is reducing the number of physical buttons in here, and that a lot of the controls and functions are being done via the infotainment system. And Tesla are pretty much the pioneers of that. So when it comes to physical buttons, I mean, I've got a couple of rocker switches here, or little wheels on the steering wheel. I got buttons on the left-hand side for the indicators, and also to flash people whilst I'm driving, because I've got no physical stalks here. They have been removed. And on the right-hand side, I got a couple of touch-sensitive buttons to do things like activate the radar-guided cruise control, activate the 360 cameras, my wiper controls, and also my voice control button. And then I have got some physical buttons to operate the windows, and a button as well to open the door. And that is pretty much it. I've got a touch sensitive button for the hazard lights, and if you do kind of touch that again, it does actually bring up your gear selector switches, but that's actually the second area in order to select a gear. The main one is on the infotainment system. So, speaking of the infotainment system, we have here a massive 15.4-inch screen. It is set in a landscape. It's not like a BYD where you can swap it from landscape to portrait. And, well, I mean, it's a Tesla infotainment system, so the animation is really slick and responsive. It is very quick as well. You can go through all these various functions. It is just really easy, yeah, to just go through them. I mean, it's like an iPad. It's that quick and responsive. It is hugely impressive. However, it's not perfect. Some of the icons can be very small. For example, if I want to see what my range is, there's a little battery up here. So I got 86 miles of range, but if I tap it, it then goes to percentage, but it just feels a little bit small to touch. And then you've got things like when you're driving, you can have a map here on the left hand side, and it would be like a Google Maps on there. And then on the right hand side, usually when you're driving, it brings up things like the radar guided cruise control, or at least shows you what's going on around you whilst you're driving using the camera based systems. And it is something we've all come to know and see on Tesla cars. As you're driving along, you can see other cars, you can see pedestrians. They all come up on graphics on the screen. I will say it's not the slickest. It feels like it's got kind of like a 12 frame per second system kind of going. And it is a little bit glitchy. I do see kind of trucks if I'm driving on the motorway, almost like they're doing kind of drifting and sideways towards me. It's a little bit kind of distracting whilst you're driving. Also, the speedo is in the top right hand corner whilst you're driving as well. So this is where I really, really want the Model 3 to come with a head-up display. And I think Tesla could do something very special with that, you know, especially with the technology that they've got here. I will mention that there's no Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, which is a little bit vexing when I've been kind of driving along and I've seen my phone ping and I had a text message on WhatsApp or iMessage, because I can't tap on it and then respond to it. So that's a little bit disappointing. So I'd love to see that kind of integrated into this, because it would definitely help a lot of drivers out there, I feel. But as I'm looking at the screens here, they are quite noisy. It's not the most kind of clearest of pictures on here, which is a little bit disappointing, because I was expecting a bit more from this on the Model 3. But as a bonus, when you are kind of reversing at night, you do find that the clarity of the screen is much better. I mean, the rear camera here is not the best, but the side camera here with its dogs and the owner is actually very good. And then you've got all the other functions that you would expect with a Tesla. You've got the fact that you can play games, you can play movies, Spotify, Netflix, loads of things you can do. And then when it comes to the dual zone climate control, it comes up on the bottom of the screen. But again, the icons are not the biggest on there, so it can be a little bit fiddly. Again, this is probably the benchmark car where the phrase "set up before you set off" really should originate from. And then you've got some of the cool features as well, where you have things like the dog mode, camping mode. So you can kind of set a temperature in here if you need to kind of leave your dog in the car and then not go into kind of overheat. So yeah, when it comes to the infotainment system, I do love the responsiveness. I do love the clarity for the most part on here. The fact that it is just, yeah, very quick, and like an iPad, is really good. And like I said, it is just so responsive, but there are so many menus, there are so many functions to go through. Like I said, you've got to set up before you set off. And then the final bit, as you can see, is the gear selector is actually on the right hand side of the screen. So you kind of move it up for forward and down for backwards, and then you press and hold in order to engage the electric handbrake. The one thing I do like is how intuitive it is. So if I am, like, say, reversed into a parking space, when I put my foot on the brake, it knows I want to go forward. So that's actually very cool. I do love there is a very good amount of technology in here, and it is intuitive. So that's one thing I'd love to see certain manufacturers kind of jump on board with this. And yes, you can control things like opening and closing the boot, opening the frunk, and also the charging flap as well. But on that note, I think it's time we leave the front of the Model 3 and see what it's like for rear passengers. Sat in the back of the Model 3, it's actually a bit of a mixed bag back here. Now firstly, that driver's seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'7" tall and 5'7" wide, and as you can see, I've got a good amount of knee room. I can't quite get my feet underneath the driver's seat, so I can't stretch out. So as a result, my knees do feel quite high when I'm sat here. So I do feel I would need to kind of get out and stretch my legs kind of midway through a journey. And then headroom is actually pretty good, even with that glass roof, which is standard on all variants of the Model 3. Now in terms of space, I would say you'd be able to get perhaps 2 adults sat in the back of the Model 3, especially if they are my width. But easily you could get 3 kids back here because there's no transmission hump to navigate over. Now, speaking of kids, we got ISOFIX supports on the outer seats. There's no plastic covers or anything with them, so all you have to do is just navigate between the vegan leather in order to affix a child seat. And then when it comes to cubby spaces, it's actually not too bad. We've got some decent sized door pockets. Again, they are lined with fabric, so you could get a medium sized bottle of drink in there. We have got your aeroplane style pockets on the backs of the front seats, and also, you can get the center armrest down, which is surprisingly long, and it does have a couple of cup holders which are rubber lined with those rubber grippers in them, so that is very handy. And then when it comes to features, well, that's your main one. You have got an 8-inch touchscreen at the back of the Model 3 where you can control things such as the air conditioning and its positioning. You have got heated outer seats as well. And then we've got things like movies and games that you can play, just like you can at the front with that large infotainment screen. And you can also connect things like your AirPods or headphones, so that way you can listen to music and not have anyone else having to listen to it. So that is actually really cool. Just below there we have got the fan with the vents there, which you can adjust via the touchscreen, and 2 USB-C charging inputs. So that is a real highlight, and I don't think there's any rivals that have anything like that as standard for those sat in the back of their cars. And then when it comes to things like the windows, they are of a really nice size. They're not tinted, as you can see, but unfortunately they only open about, I don't know, 55 to 60% of the way down. So that's a little bit disappointing, but there is enough of a ledge there that I can rest my arm on it. And then finally, yes, we have got a couple of little hooks there, so you can perhaps hang a jacket or something if you are on your way to a business meeting. And then, yeah, that's about it, sat here in the back of the Model 3. I will say I do like the fact that we have got this lighter leatherette or vegan leather here, which is something you can go for on the all-wheel drive version of the Model 3. It would usually just be dark leatherette, but yeah, it does light up the cabin. However, it will mean that it's going to be prone to kind of stains and stuff, but also with the headlining, which I do believe is light as standard, I can already see there are quite a few stains and stuff from grubby fingers from previous journalists who have had this car. So yeah, when it comes to being sat here in the back of the Model 3, I would like it to be a bit more spacious. I am actually surprised that I can't get my feet underneath the driver's seat. And yeah, I do think I would be able to do, say, a kind of short journey, and I would need then just to kind of stretch my legs out a little bit because they do feel quite high, and I kind of, yeah, it's not the most natural of positions to kind of sit in when you're sat in the back of a car. But on that note, I think it's time that we leave the rear seats of the Model 3 and we see what it's like in the boot. Now, before I open the boot of the Model 3, I will just mention one of the other changes on this facelift is that the badge is gone and it's now been replaced with the Tesla name. And I actually think it looks very aesthetically pleasing. Definitely gives a more upmarket feel to the Model 3. And also something I will mention again before I open the boot is that the taillight cluster is actually fixed into the boot lid. So if you have the hazard lights on and the boot opens up, they actually come on down here where the fog lights are. So that's actually a very cool safety feature and does show that Tesla have done their homework and a little bit kind of, yeah, innovative in one of their safety features. Now, the boot, when you get it open on the Model 3, you are presented with 594 litres of space, which is actually a massive amount of boot capacity for this segment of car, easily beating the likes of the Hyundai Ioniq 6 and BYD Seal. But as you can see, yes, it still retains that classic saloon shape. So in regards to versatility, yeah, you can't get large bulky items into the back of the Model 3. So if you are after a hatchback, I would recommend looking at the Polestar 2 or the new Volkswagen ID.7. But as you can see, with the boot open, you are still greeted with a nice wide square load area and nice opening as well. There's hardly any boot lip to navigate over, and you can easily get a large suitcase plus a few weekend bags into the back of the Model 3 or a few carry-ons as well. Now, when it comes to features, well, we've got some extra bits of storage here on the sides of the boot area. Oh, and we got plenty of underfloor storage. That is a highlight. Clearly, you got all of your charging cables and everything in there, but what you can do is put your charging cables in the front, for which you've got 88 litres, and then you could put something like another weekend bag underneath the boot floor. That's actually really handy, and actually quite good for security as well. But yeah, there's no other features. You can't, well, there's no 12-volt socket, there's no tethering hooks. The only other thing I would say is if you do decide to get the seats down, is that they do go almost completely flat, but just be aware that they are fixed headrests, so it might be a little bit awkward as they rub against the back of the driver's seat and front passenger seat. So yeah, when it comes to the boot capacity on the Model 3, it is still very decent in terms of numbers. Just wish it had a few more features, and well, again, if you're after a hatchback and you want it to be a Tesla, then you'll have to wait for the new Model Y for next year, unless you want to grab hold of one of those now. But on that note, I think it's time we get the boot down and we see what the new Model 3 is like on the open road. Once you start driving the Model 3, first impressions are actually very positive. It's a nice, comfortable, easy car to drive, and it is very refined. I am starting to understand the Model 3's appeal. Now, when it comes to visibility, this is actually a bit of a mixed bag. Now, firstly, the windscreen drops really low, so it means I've got a wonderful view of the road ahead. Now, because this is, of course, a ground-up EV, it does mean that the bonnet does slope away, and I can't judge the front of the car. But of course, this being a Tesla, it is surrounded by cameras. Now, the A-pillar, I'm going to say right now, is bloody thick as hell. I mean, that is just massive. And on a couple of occasions, I have struggled to look around it when approaching a junction or a roundabout. So that's just something to be aware of. The wing mirrors are of a nice shape and size. I would say I'd like them to be a little bit bigger, but you know what? They seem absolutely fine. And when it comes to blind spot monitoring, I don't have a symbol or anything on the mirror itself. There's actually a little red dot that appears in the speaker. So again, just something to be aware of. Then when I look over my shoulder, I do find that the C-pillar, well, it's just as thick as the A-pillar, but it doesn't create too much of a blind spot. And I do like the fact as well that when we indicate, we have got kind of the blind spot cameras, same as what we've seen on Hyundai Group cars. However, rear visibility, I'm going to say is okay, but needs improving because it kind of slopes up towards the base of the rear screen. So as a result, you don't have as much of a rear view as other cars in the segment, something like the BYD Seal, for example. But like I said, it is surrounded with cameras, so when it comes to things like parking, yeah, it's an absolute doddle. So yeah, once you get going in the new Model 3, it is a nice, comfortable place to be. I do like the refinement as well, but I just like some improvements with some of the visibility. Now, there are 4 versions of the Model 3 available. I don't really want to say trim levels, because in terms of kind of standard equipment, all cars pretty much come with the same level of kit. But you have an entry-level rear-wheel drive with a standard range. You then move up to a rear-wheel drive long range. You then have the all-wheel drive long range, which is what I've got here, and I've got the dual motors. And then you've got the top-of-the-range performance. Now, I'm going to be honest, with the type of car that the Model 3 is, I would say go for the rear-wheel drive long range, because on paper at least, it is actually very impressive, especially as well if you stick with those 18-inch alloy wheels. And I will explain why in the kind of next section of the video, talking about the batteries and the power. But that's one thing I do like about Tesla on their website. They do mention that actual range difference if you go for the 18-inch alloy wheels, the standard wheels, or if you opt for the optional 19s. So that's one thing, again, I am actually very impressed with Tesla for letting you know about. But personally, if it was me getting a Model 3, I would want the rear-wheel drive long-range version with the 18-inch alloy wheels, and yes, perhaps a couple of little packs and that added to the car. But yeah, I don't see the Model 3 being a performance car. I wouldn't want to go for the performance. I would use this just to get the most range out of it. So when it comes to powering the Model 3, as I mentioned, there are 4 versions available, but 2 battery choices. And essentially, if you go for the entry-level car, which is the rear-wheel drive standard range, that's where you get the smaller battery. And I will put everything on screen now for you. And just for kind of clarity, I will put on the ranges if you go for the 18-inch alloys or the 19-inch alloys. So even if you go for the standard rear-wheel drive, you can have a range of up to 344 miles. If you go for the rear-wheel drive long range, that jumps with those 18s to a very impressive claimed 436 miles. I mean, that does beat the likes of the Polestar 2, which up until now was pretty much the big rival to the Model 3, especially when it came to claimed range. And then power-wise, if you go for that rear-wheel drive entry level, you got about 245 brake horsepower, and then with the rear-wheel drive large or long range, you got 320 brake horsepower, and then with this car I've got here, that goes up to 351. So yeah, there is an awful lot of performance, there's an awful lot of range there available. It is massively impressive on paper, and that's the key thing. It is on paper. Whatever you'll do in real life will obviously depend on driving conditions, weather, how you drive as well. So there are a lot of factors to consider. But realistically, I mean, when this was charged to 100%, it was showing me about 340 miles. And in terms of outside temperature and that, it was about 10 degrees centigrade. So kind of average UK conditions. And I was very impressed by that. In fact, this is going to be the first time I'm actually charging up the Model 3 since I've had it, and I picked it up on Tuesday and today is Sunday, so I've really kind of enjoyed living with it, not needing to charge it up. And yeah, like I said, going on this journey now, really take advantage of that supercharging network. But as you saw from all the figures on screen there, in terms of claimed range, in terms of performance, it is actually very impressive. Again, I understand why there is that appeal for Tesla Model 3s, or just Teslas in general. So speaking of power and performance, when it comes to this dual motor long range that I've got, obviously I've got a 0 to 62 time of around 4.2 seconds, which is very impressive for this type of car, but I've not needed to use it. In fact, I've barely kind of put my foot down in anger. Now, I will say, when you do kind of accelerate, it is very responsive, it is quick, and there's a nice surge when you put your foot down. So that is a nice positive, again, regarding that performance. Brakes have been, yeah, very good when it comes to regeneration, but the actual brake pedal itself is a little bit spongy to begin with. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but like all cars, a couple of days and you've kind of got the feel of the brake pedal weight. So yeah, that performance is there for me if I need it. But in this type of car, once again, I'd be happy with the long range. I mean, yes, that drops the 0 to 62 time to around, I think it's about 4.9 seconds, which is still massively impressive for that type of car. But like I said, I don't see the Model 3 as a performance car. I just see it as a executive saloon, like a BMW 3 Series that's going to spend a lot of its life on the open road, on the motorway, just going from point A to point B. And again, I think that's why a lot of people like it, because you don't really get an emotional attachment to the car. You're using it as an appliance, you're using it as an iPhone or something. So having that supercharger network is just like a nice kind of, it's a nice reliability to have against other cars out there. So again, I do appreciate it. But like I said, with the performance, yeah, it is there. It is very quick, but I've not really kind of felt the need to put my foot down and scare people when I've had them in the passenger seat, because it just doesn't feel, again, like that type of car. Now, when it comes to charging and regen braking, I'm going to say for the Model 3, it is very good, but it's not class best. So if you go for the rear-wheel drive standard range version of the Model 3, you have a maximum charging capability of 150 kilowatts. And then if you go for the long-range version and performance versions of the Model 3, that increases to 250 kilowatts. And that's when you can really take advantage of Tesla's supercharged network. But to be fair, when it comes to that kind of 10 to 80% number, it's very similar. I mean, both of them have around half an hour to get from 10 to 80, even on the kind of standard range version of the Model 3, but it is a little bit behind the likes of Hyundai Group that have that maximum 350 kilowatt charging capacity. Granted, you just need to find a charger that can do so. And then when it comes to things such as regen braking, what I'll say is it has a kind of what you get is what you get kind of thing with it. I can't seem to adjust it on the infotainment system, but it is a strong set of regenerative braking. It will bring you to a complete stop, but it doesn't take you to a complete stop in the way that you're expecting it to. It kind of, I don't know, it just keeps crawling a little bit, and you tentatively put your foot over the brake to kind of almost give the car a little bit of a hint of, look, let's stop now, let's stop doing this little bit of crawling that you're doing with me. So I'd like Tesla to kind of, you know, when we stop, let's stop. When we get to 1 mile an hour, let's kind of stop it there kind of thing, and not keep crawling. Now, when it comes to the Model 3's ride and refinement, I am going to say it's a much better car than the pre-facelifted version. I drove that briefly a couple of years ago, and I found it to be very crashy and just not a comfortable place to be. The ride was definitely on the firm side, but I wouldn't have called it sporty. This new revised Model 3 is a massive improvement when it comes to ride quality. It definitely is a more comfortable place to be, but I wouldn't say it was perfect. It's not, you know, the most comfortable car in class. Definitely something like a BYD Seal is a more comfortable car for longer journeys. I think this is more on a par with the Hyundai Ioniq 6, and I do think this is more comfortable than the revised Polestar 2. That still has a very firm ride that can be a little bit crashy. And again, this is the second reason why I say stick with those 18-inch alloys, the standard alloys on the car, because it will just give you a little bit more when it comes to ride quality. And when you're driving about town, you do find it is very comfortable. It deals with most of the bumps and imperfections pretty well, but it can be a little bit boomy and a little bit crashy on occasion. So that is just something to keep an eye on when you're driving about in town. However, when you're on the motorway doing 70 miles an hour, you do find that it does settle down. It does become very comfortable. I can still feel some of the little bumps and imperfections coming through, but it's really not that bad. But like I said, for a long distance cruiser, if I'm going to do lots of driving, I would want something like the BYD Seal. It just feels a little bit more set up for comfort over the Model 3. And then there is the big Achilles heel. These seats. I've only been driving for an hour and a bit, and I can feel the top of my back starting to ache a little bit. Now, I don't think it's due to my size being a big beary guy. I actually just think it's the seat design, because I know other people, particularly guys who are quite skinnier than me, have actually found that the seats are again quite uncomfortable, particularly for a longer journey. But you let me know in the comment section below, are you a new Model 3 owner, and how have you found the seats? Now, when it comes to refinement, at low speed, this is a real highlight. It is very quiet in here. You can take advantage of those 17 speakers with the uprated sound system over the 14 from the pre-facelift, and it is a really lovely system. I do find now, driving at 70 miles an hour, I have got tyre roar coming into the cabin, and there is a bit of wind noise. Now, it seems to be coming down from the front of the A-pillar, which is a bit surprising considering how kind of curved and aerodynamic the front of the Model 3 is. But again, I would just have the stereo on, I'd be talking to my passenger, and I wouldn't have any issues. I'm not having to raise my voice as well. That's something I do appreciate here in the Model 3. But saying that, there are other cars in this segment where you can basically do the same. So yeah, when it comes to motorway driving, the refinement side, it should be absolutely fine. With the stereo going, you'll be absolutely loving it. And then, like I said, at low speed, yeah, it really is a joy. It is a very quiet and refined place to be. So yeah, overall, with ride and refinement, massive improvement over the pre-facelifted version of the Model 3, but I still think there's room for improvement, especially with this being kind of set up for a bit more of a sporty car over, say, a very comfortable one. So what about the Model 3's handling? Well, this was always a strong point on the pre-facelifted version because a lot of people felt it was a very sporty car, and I can believe them, because with that firm suspension setup, you do find, I wouldn't say it feels properly sporty, but it does feel very responsive. Now, I do like the shape and size of the steering wheel. It is nice to kind of grab hold of and go through the corners, and because of that firm suspension, it does mean that when you chuck it into the corners, there's very little in the way to roll and lean. Now, another reason why I kind of feel as though the Model 3 isn't a sporty car is because I can't find any drive modes in here. It doesn't appear to be set up to have sport mode, eco and such. What you do have is something that just basically adjusts the severity of the accelerator pedal, and then you find that the actual steering itself is very responsive. It is very quick, so that's something I do like about the Model 3. And yeah, it does kind of, I wouldn't say it gives you like the feedback of a very sporty car like a Hyundai Ioniq 5N, but it does kind of, yeah, I do kind of know what the front wheels are doing, but I don't feel that kind of proper connection. And I don't find that to be too disappointing. It's just something that I've noticed. It just feels very much like an electric car. Oh, I think that's a Tesla thing right there. It just feels very much, yeah, like an electric car with the handling. So you haven't got that kind of proper feedback you get from an ICE car. The steering rack as well, it hasn't got too much in the way of turns in there, but it is very responsive, and there is quite a bit of weight to it as well, so just be aware of that if you are looking to park the car up. So what have been some of the highlights and some of the little niggles I've come across living with the Model 3 this week? Well, highlights have definitely been the ease of use. The fact that you can just kind of get in and go, and if you've got the Tesla app, which the phone acts as your key, you just got to keep it in your pocket, you get in, and away you go. It really is that easy. Couple that with the supercharging network, and I completely understand why so many people love Teslas. And these are the perfect electric cars if you want to do long distance driving because of that supercharging network. So I completely understand. The technology as well is really good. It's very intuitive. Even now on the motorway, which the Model 3 does feel at home, is just really good. I mean, I'm just driving along now. It's slowing down because this truck kind of almost pulled out in front of me. But when it comes to things like changing lane, it really is simple. It's constantly scanning, and then all I got to do is tap on the indicator. I can see the little camera there, a little turn of the wheel, and it's done it for me. Granted, I have got the top of the range autopilot pack with this car, but it's just so much easier than other cars I've driven, like from Hyundai Group with their highway drive assist, where it becomes a little bit sensitive. But on the flip side of that, if you use the radar guided cruise control off the motorway, it gets very angry very quickly. It does take control of the wheel. Sometimes you do feel like you're getting very close to a white line, so when you kind of tug on the steering wheel, it will disengage. So that's just something to be aware of there. And it has on a couple of occasions properly jolted me and kind of pulled me into the white line. I was a little bit apprehensive when that happened, so I only used the radar guided cruise when I'm on the motorway, because it actually works brilliantly. And then, like I said, you know, the actual infotainment system is a really great system. It is a little bit glitchy, and it sometimes forgets some of the settings that you've already kind of saved. So for example, there's a lovely LED light that goes across the kind of front of the dashboard. I've got it in a lovely blue, but sometimes it disappears and I have to go back in to kind of reset it, because I think it's a bit of a nice feature in the car. So that's something that's a little bit vexing. And then as well, I'll be driving and I've noticed that the range has changed, and I'm thinking, oh, I've got more range on the car. But no, what's actually happened is it's changed to kilometers, and I didn't do that. So that's another thing as well, just to kind of be aware of in the Model 3. And then other kind of, well, highlights I'd say is, yes, you've got all the 360 cameras and everything, and I love the fact that you got them for your blind spot turning and things like that. But they are prone to being covered or blocked, as Tesla say, and I've yet to have a journey where it doesn't tell me that one of the camera systems is blocked. So that's something as well that's a little bit annoying, because I don't have any parking sensors. It's all done via cameras. I don't have any LiDAR, I don't believe, in this car. And Tesla like to do this thing where they just rely on cameras, which is, yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit of improvement there with regards to some of the safety tech. Because, I mean, Subaru tend to use cameras as well as parking sensors at the same time, but they're fully kind of transparent in what the limitations are, hence why they call it an eyesight system. And then the other kind of little niggles I've come across is some creaks and rattles inside the cabin, but they are only noticeable on a poor road surface. And then, yeah, I've mentioned it before, these seats. I have been driving now for over 2.5 hours, and my back is aching. So that's something I'd love Tesla to have a look at, because I have heard a couple of other journalists drive Model 3s, and they are a bit more slimmer than myself, and they've had the same issue. But other than that, I have been very impressed with the Model 3 and the technology that's on board, and the usability and ease of use as well. And I think on that note, we should kind of, I think, jump on to the conclusion. So what are my thoughts on the 2024 Tesla Model 3? Well, I asked two questions at the beginning of this review. What's the car like, and has it been dethroned by its rivals? Well, as an electric car, it really is, I think, in some ways a benchmark, especially when it comes to the supercharging network. Tesla are very much leading the way there. And then as an electric car itself, it's got very good efficiency. It drives very well, it is practical, and it's jam-packed full of kit. But, and this is with the 2024 Model 3, these big changes with the indicators, with the everything done on the steering wheel, and that is, I do think, is a step too far. The muscle memory to kind of use the indicators on the wheel, I'm having to look at them as I'm using them, is a little bit kind of annoying, and a stalk is just so much simpler. So that's another thing as well on the Model 3. I would love to kind of, I mean, they would say it's a case of going backwards, but no, I think it's absolutely fine. We don't need to move forwards in that kind of direction. I mean, if you look at cars like Ferrari, yes, they have the indicators on the wheel, but the left is on the left and the right is on the right. So it makes it kind of easier to use, especially roundabouts, which I'm going around now. And yeah, I do think as well, the one thing with the Model 3, in fact just Teslas in general, is that I think they're more kind of considered as appliances than actual proper cars. When I've been reviewing any kind of car, I always try and put a bit of emotion in there. How do I emotionally feel about the vehicle? And when I'm driving the Model 3, I get the impression it's just a very cold car. It's an appliance, it's an iPhone. Yes, you want to get the next generation because it has more kit and more tech, but I don't feel emotionally kind of connected to this car. It just feels like an appliance, and that kind of goes with the interior as well. It's a nice, simple design, but it feels a little bit cold. And then we've got the rivals. So basically, Would I buy a Model 3? Personally, no. I don't like the buttons on the steering wheel. Some of the aspects of the safety systems and that I've just found a little bit, it's too much to kind of go through. If it was myself, I would possibly look at maybe an Ioniq 6 or a BYD Seal, but I would love to try, for a full review, a BMW i4 and the new Volkswagen ID.7. That has actually been very highly praised. So I'd be keen to have a go of one of them and let you guys know what I think. And I can actually see there's actually a Seal in front of me, which is quite cool. That's one of the big rivals to the Model 3. Let's see if we can tuck in behind him. So yeah, in regards to the Model 3 as an electric car, it is really, really good. It does set the benchmark in some areas. I do feel it's falling behind in others. And then when it comes to the rivals, I would say it's not all with Tesla. I think there are rivals out there which in some areas do better it. And I actually think the best way to word it is, will be more suitable for yourselves rather than the Tesla. That's my personal opinion, because if you want something that's very practical and you want something that's like a hatchback, then you're going to want to look at the ID.7 or a Polestar 2. If you want something that has, well, all the safety kit and tech and everything, I mean, to be fair, every car is very, very safe. Even the BYD Seal is a 5-star car. So, in a way, you are spoilt for choice. But personally, I don't think Tesla are fully leading the way anymore. I do think other manufacturers are catching up. But it comes down, I think, to personal preference and what you're going to be using the car for. If it's a business car, you're going to be driving on the motorway, go for the Tesla. No hesitation. If it's something that you want to have as a family car, I think there are other cars out there that would be more suitable. So yeah, the Tesla Model 3 is still a very incredible electric vehicle. I completely understand its appeal. But personally, and I think for some of you as well, it might not be the right choice. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the new Tesla Model 3. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. Of course, if you've got any questions about the Model 3 and my time with it, please put them down in the comments section below and I'll do my utmost to answer them. Of course, I am on social media like Facebook, Instagram and X, so do follow me on there for additional content. And yeah, I'm really happy to have Tesla on the channel finally. I know it's been one of the big electric cars out there, so thank you again to Tesla UK for this loan. I'll definitely be looking to get other cars that are rivals to the Model 3 on the channel, so I hope you make a buying decision. But everyone, in the meantime, have yourselves a great day and I will catch you all in the next video. So take care everybody, and bye-bye. It's just the fact I've got to keep looking down at those bloody buttons.